I think we have an opportunity to do something really, really big.
We don't think that this tax is necessary.
As homelessness spreads across our region, lawmakers in Olympia are debating a new tax on big business in King County to help address the crisis.
And we're proud to support this effort and contribute to the solution.
This time around, companies like Expedia, Microsoft, and Starbucks are willing to consider a new payroll tax, but it's far from a done deal.
There are a number of provisions in the language that need to be addressed.
With a short time left this legislative session, can lawmakers broker a compromise?
We have to go big in our investments.
Our panel weighs in.
Businesses are looking for predictability.
It's also a fraction of what is needed to actually address our homelessness crisis.
Working out a regional response to a regional crisis. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. State lawmakers are working on a measure that would give King County the ability to tax its big businesses and provide funding for affordable housing, homelessness, and behavioral health needs. While many businesses support this concept, critics are worried about how House Bill 2948 would distribute and spend tax dollars at a county-wide level. Plus, the Seattle City Council says the money raised won't be nearly enough to tackle a growing problem. Council members are also concerned the state might block them from raising more revenue at the city level, setting up a political drama between the city, county, and state, quickly heading toward a final act in Olympia.
We need more housing now, and we need services for people in crisis.
Representative Nicole Macri, in introducing House Bill 2907 in early February, laid out a program to tax big businesses in King County and raise $120 million per year for affordable housing, homelessness services, and public safety.
This bill represents a step in the right direction to a more progressive revenue system, and it is right-sized to address challenges at a regional level.
A law allowing a county this taxing authority would be a first for our state. And it's also unique in that many big businesses, Microsoft, Expedia, and others, are in favor of it.
Helping tackle local homelessness and housing affordability crises is core to our values as a company and as a workforce, and we're proud to support this effort and contribute to the solution.
So, what's the problem?
None of us were at the table for this conversation.
A number of mayors around King County say they weren't consulted about the state's plan. And some businesses want to make sure, if they're paying a state tax to help the homeless, that cities won't tag on their own tax as well.
This regional solution should preempt local municipalities from imposing a similar fee, effectively double dipping the taxing of businesses in such municipalities.
Representative Macri, with new lead sponsor Larry Springer of the 45th District, has tried to respond to these concerns with a new bill, HB 2948.
The conversation was not over.
The new measure would raise $30 million more than the original plan, would exempt small businesses unless their gross receipts are above $3 million yearly, and would allow cities with populations over 60,000 to retain 0.1% of the revenue generated in that city.
Seattle is not alone in its concerns.
Yet with that nod toward the King County suburbs, Macri adds she would not support a bill that would limit the full ability of Seattle or other cities to enact their own local taxes for homeless services, a position she knows could impact how businesses will deal with this bill.
Whether or not we lose the support of big business is to be determined. It's incumbent on all of us to do whatever we can to try to figure this out during this short legislative session.
Paul Guppy says there's not much to figure out.
We don't think that this tax is necessary in Seattle and King County.
Guppy, Vice President for Research at the Washington Policy Center, says our region's hot economy is generating more than enough revenue for city and county governments.
And so they have the resources, we think, to deal with the homeless problem if they would just be effective about it.
And while Guppy is aware the state's excise tax would only impact bigger businesses, he's concerned, especially if Seattle adds its own local tax, that the floodgates are opening.
What working people hear, what homeowners hear, is my taxes are eventually going to go up. Maybe not with this bill, But that is the direction that Seattle wants to go.
Councilmember Shama Sawant knows exactly what direction she wants to go.
That big business needs to pay its fair share.
Sawant has been working on what she calls the Amazon tax measure, a $300 million plan to provide social housing and a Green New Deal by taxing the upper 3% of Seattle's businesses.
This is a tax on the wealthy.
Sawant points to a recent report from McKinsey Consultants that says Seattle and King County need $450 million to $1.1 billion per year for the next decade to address homelessness, with House Bill 2948 promising $150 million per year. Sawant says banning cities from passing their own tax measures simply doesn't add up.
We are talking about what could be, if the ban passes, a historic sellout of the working people.
Are we in the midst of a sellout or a small step towards progress on helping the homeless? That's the question now facing lawmakers at the city, county, and state level, with just weeks left in a short session in Olympia to wrestle with a decades-old challenge.
It took us years to get to the place where we are in terms of the scale and scope of the homelessness crisis in our state, and most acutely in King County, and it will take us years, I believe, to solve it.
And joining us to discuss this very important topic further, we have with us Alison Eisinger. She is the Executive Director of the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness. Alison, good to see you again.
Thank you.
We also have with us John Scholes. He's President and CEO of the Downtown Seattle Association. John, good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, Katie Wilson. She is General Secretary of the Transit Riders Union. Katie, good to have you as well.
Thank you.
All right, let's break this down. I want to start big picture here, and Alison, I'll go to you first before we dive into the preemption issue, which I know is big. Do you support this effort from the state with House Bill 2948 to tax big businesses in King County to pay for homelessness services and affordable housing? If so, why? And also lay out any concerns you might have about this measure too.
Sure. Absolutely, yes. We support House Bill 2948. And one of the things that is really exciting is that actually many stakeholders, including some who are not always in alignment, support 2948. In fact, Representative Springer made a joke about the fact that he and Representative Macri don't often sponsor bills together.
True.
But they and many others have brought this piece of legislation forward because the largest businesses in our region have stepped forward to acknowledge that they understand that our entire region needs additional significant investments to house and assist people experiencing homelessness in our community, and that they want to be taxed. They are the initiators of what became this proposal. In addition, those who provide housing, behavioral health services, and shelter services for people have long known that we cannot make the progress that everyone wants to see if we're under investing in solutions and what works.
Okay. And we're going to talk about those dollars and cents in just a minute.
Sure.
But John, I want to throw a similar question to you. I'm thinking less than 2 years ago, this idea of taxing big businesses, at least what the Seattle City Council had planned at the time with the head tax, was not supported by the DSA. You were quoted at the time, taxing jobs is bad policy. The DSA is now behind this idea of a tax on big business. I'm trying to figure out what changed.
We support a regional investment in housing, treatment, homeless services that's really focused on a regional problem, and that's what this is. Our homeless crisis is not a crisis only in the city of Seattle. It's a crisis across King County, and that's a big difference from the proposal of 2 years ago that was really Seattle only. Seattle has tried to solve this problem on its own for 40 years. We've had a low-income housing levy, which we doubled in 2016. We've invested more out of our general fund in human services and homeless services than every city in King County combined. We can't solve this on our own. We need a regional solution to a regional problem. And today, 70% of the unsheltered population in King County resides in Seattle. But Seattle is only 30% of the county's population. So we're carrying a big burden here for a county-wide problem. We need the rest of the county to step up. We support a plan that does that.
Okay, and a lot of businesses do too. Thanks for that. Katie, your thoughts on House Bill 2948. Do you support this bill? Why? Your concerns about it going forward, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a very important moment to be having this conversation. And One of the reasons why the idea of a county progressive business tax is so exciting is that we do have the most regressive tax system in the whole country, right? We all know that.
In our state, yes.
And King County in particular is really structurally underfunded. The county is limited to a 1% increase in property taxes every year, which is far less than inflation. So that means that every single year, the county is faced with having to cover higher costs without funds to match. It's like as an individual, if you imagine, everything that you're paying for goes up 3%, your rent goes up 50 or $100 a month, and you didn't get a raise, right? So that's a big problem. And also the local funding options that the county currently has tend to be regressive, like the sales tax. Really, it hits working and poor people the hardest. And so the idea that King County could now gain a new authority to get some progressive revenue is really exciting. So I think that part of the bill in this conversation is really important.
Okay, thanks. The first time this ever would have been done in the state, so that's a very important part of this. John, I want to start with you on this whole preemption piece, this idea of the state banning Seattle or other cities from enacting a local tax to deal with homelessness in addition to the state business excise tax. The Seattle City Council opposes the idea of having a ban. They point to the McKinsey report, which says we need $450 million to $1 billion per year for the next 10 years just to catch up here. House Bill 2948 raises about $150 million per year, and currently the bill does not preempt cities from raising their own taxes from businesses. Your thoughts about that?
Businesses are looking for predictability, and if we're going to impose a countywide payroll tax, we want some predictability on what the ultimate tax burden will be. And so we think preemption is an important principle in the development of a bill. And I think the McKinsey report got a lot of things right and focused in on that there's tens of thousands of folks who are rent burdened in King County. They're this close to being homeless. We are not doing enough as a community to deal with what we have today is an imbalance around the number of jobs we've created over the last 10 years and the number of housing units. So part of solving that is, yes, raising more tax money to build more supportive housing units. But we also have to look at things like just getting housing permits and housing built faster. It takes 60% longer today in the city of Seattle to get a permit than it did 6 years ago. There's a project in the U District that has been waiting a year and a half, a 24-story apartment building, a year and a half to get a land use permit. So there's other strategies that we need to move aggressively to deal with the shortage of housing, and we need to really lift the limits on the housing that can be built, particularly in the city of Seattle.
Dollars, though, do you think it's enough? I mean, I think that's the big question here.
Well, we were looking at a state budget draft budget from the House and the Senate that are at record levels with homeless investment.
With one-time funding.
Some of that, okay, let John finish. Go ahead.
We've doubled the housing levy. We've passed a historic MHA legislation, so new development in Seattle pays for affordable housing. And we would make a historic investment through this countywide tax. So that, I think, is significant. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't deal with the broader market here, if we don't deal with the limits, how long it takes to get a permit, that 75% of the residential land in the city of Seattle is zoned single family, so it's illegal to build apartments in most of Seattle. If we don't deal with that, we will not solve the homeless crisis.
Okay, that's fair. Katie, I want to go to you, and Alison, I promise I'll come right back. I want to get your reaction to what you're hearing here. I know there are a number of big businesses willing to take a step with House Bill 2948. It's the first time we've ever had a bill like this in our state. Are you worried that this push for preemption could sidetrack what appears to be a good start here, or do you see this preemption deal as a way to let businesses off the hook? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's absolutely a worry, that, taking one small step forward, we're then preventing ourselves from taking the further steps that actually need to be taken to address this problem.
You think it would prevent that later on, I guess?
Well, I mean, so if we're including preemption language in this legislation that prevents cities within King County from raising additional funds, and if this county measure raises, 120 or 150 million a year, which is real money, I mean, that's really helpful revenue. I want to emphasize that, but it's also a fraction of what is needed to actually address our homelessness crisis. And so, if we're taking that step, but then preventing cities within the county from actually addressing the need, then that seems like a bad deal appeal to me. And I also just want to point out that there's a little bit of a double standard going on here. I know John mentioned businesses want predictability in the setup piece. There was the phrase double dipping, and I don't hear those things when we're talking about sales tax and property tax. So we layer on regressive taxes at all levels of government without worrying about poor people.
Okay, I want to go to Alison and then some pushback here. But Alison, just to set this up, I know a number of businesses say, without preempting cities from adding their own taxes, they don't want to support this. Your thoughts about preemption?
I feel as though many people who care deeply about these issues are at risk of losing sight of the forest for the trees. What we have here is a complex, multiple stakeholder negotiation that is going on. We sent a letter to state lawmakers saying that our recommendation was that this legislation raise at least $450 million a year to get us to the lower end of the McKinsey recommendation, because we know that that's what we need sustained, ongoing. I think we have to be pragmatists and optimists at the same time. I think Representative Macri and many other state lawmakers understand that politics is the art of the possible, and that we shouldn't foreclose avenues to getting to what is truly historic, which would be new, progressive, revenue-generating authority at the county level. I took a look right before I came up here just to refresh my own memory about the school districts and the numbers of homeless students in them that are among the highest in the state. And of course, Seattle has the highest rate of students experiencing homelessness, but followed right after that by Highline, Federal Way, Kent, and Renton. So we are talking about people, and I feel like it is extraordinarily important as we're talking about bill numbers and really important complex policy issues like preemption, which is not a blanket thing, but can take many forms, for us not to get caught up in the positioning and posturing and forget why this legislation was introduced. Personally, I have been working with homeless kids and families and with other people experiencing homelessness for the majority of my life now. And it is excruciating to hear elected officials seriously say, maybe this is too hard to do right now, maybe we should wait until next year.
And that's a big piece of this. And I'd like to try to, if we can, try to cast that crystal ball to what's going on in Olympia right now. And John, I'll bring you in here. I'm trying to figure out what sort of compromise is possible, or if that's even on the table here. I'm thinking about state lawmakers who are thinking about this preemption clause. Maybe they're thinking, okay, if we put that in, maybe businesses would be willing to pay more or whatever else. You talk about predictability, but do you think that's part of the negotiations right now over this?
We'll see what comes out of Olympia. It's a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day negotiation. I know. But what I do know is that what the principles we've put forward are supportive of what would be a historic investment on an annual basis at a countywide level around this issue, a historic amount of investment. At a regional level, which we think is really important, the city and county have come together through the leadership of Executive Constantine and Mayor Durkin on forming a regional authority, which is recommendations from national consultants that we need to centralize our response to homelessness. This bill reflects that. I think Seattle continuing to try to go alone does not, and is counter to the recommendations they've received from their own consultants. So. This would be historic. We think it's the right thing to do, and we hope the legislature moves forward.
Katie, I'll draw you in here. I'm trying to figure out if there's a certain dollar level with the state bill where it would make more sense to you if that preemption piece was in place, or any thoughts on that?
Speaking from a personal point of view here, I think that the best way to, if businesses want to prevent the city from doing its own thing, the best way to do that is actually to pass a county measure that's large enough that it meets the need. And then I think that kind of will to do something at the city will go away because we won't need to. Maybe the county can be authorized to raise up to $1.1 billion a year, and any, recognizing that the county council might not want to use that full authority, and then maybe cities can pick up the slack.
I think about this from a business perspective. So you're a business in Seattle. If there's an extra tax on me as a business, then why wouldn't I move my business to Bellevue? Things of that nature. I think we hear that a lot from the business community, and I wanted to get your take on that. Does a measure like this, if we did have a Seattle-only bit in place, does that create something that would create an unfair advantage business-wise?
I mean, I think that there are many, many reasons why businesses choose to locate in Seattle and do business here. And so I don't think that you would see businesses, a mass exodus of business from Seattle if we pass a modest tax. And recognize that, for example, San Francisco in 2018 passed at the ballot with 60% support a $300 million a year big business tax for homelessness, which is exactly what Councilmember Sawant has proposed here in Seattle. So this is not a enormous outlandish measure.
Can I add?
Okay, John has his hand up, and then we'll jump to you. Please, John.
I think San Francisco and LA are two cities worth looking at because they're spending record amounts on homelessness, and their numbers are going in the wrong direction, particularly in the last year. So I think we're kidding ourselves that we can spend our way out of this problem while also not dealing with the restrictions that we as a city in particular have put in place on housing, how long it takes to get a permit, the types of housing that can be built and where. We will not get out of this hole that we've dug ourselves and help the people that are currently homeless and the ones that are right on the brink if we don't deal with the broader issues in our housing market.
All right. Alison, and then back to you, Katie. Go ahead.
Well, I think the reality that we find ourselves in is the product of decades of policy decisions made by real people at the federal level, at the state legislature primarily, and to some extent at the local level. So the passage of legislation, the passage of bond measures in San Francisco and Los Angeles is very recent and very new. And I think it is completely unrealistic to expect that you're going to see change, particularly around something like housing and homelessness, in just a short amount of time. But what I wanted to say is, in our conversation, what we are talking about here is actually a very modest corporate payroll tax on the biggest businesses. And it is significant that the businesses themselves have come forward with this proposal. Actually, great care was taken both in the original bill and, as I understand it, in the current form of the legislation to protect small businesses. And what we're talking about are the biggest corporations that, in fact, have very large profits. And in the words of the representative of Expedia, in many cases are at the table because they see themselves as having responsibility as corporations that operate in these communities where there is great affluence and great poverty. And they are saying that they need to step forward and do something. That is one of the most significant things. We can disagree about how much businesses might need to put forward as their share, but I think we can agree that it is important and good that businesses are saying they have a role to play.
I hear what you're saying. Katie, you wanted to jump in with something.
Well, I mean, just that I think to respond to John's point about permitting and zoning, this is a yes and situation, as they like to say. Like, yes, we can make progress in those areas, but one of the things that came out of the McKinsey report is that it's really the economic growth in our region that is driving the homelessness crisis. And so I think it's entirely appropriate to be asking businesses to step up and contribute to that. And until we build housing at scale, our response to homelessness is not gonna work because we have these bottlenecks, right? So you have someone sitting in a shelter bed and you're not able to move them into housing. And so you have one person in a shelter bed all year when that shelter bed there should be people just moving through that into housing, right? And so it's just so important that we get our resources up to the scale that is needed. And so that I think has to be just our primary purpose here.
Okay, John, you had something to say.
Yeah, we absolutely need more permanent supportive housing. I was touring a number of DESC shelters yesterday, the Morrison and the Navigation Center up on 12th. We have people there that need to be in a permanent supportive housing unit, and they aren't able to be there today because one is not available. So that's why we're supporting a significant investment at a countywide level, as are a number of companies who see the real need out there, and companies that are today contributing themselves to private capital campaigns from Plymouth Housing and DESC and others. And we have the success and prosperity that we've enjoyed in this region have pushed people into homelessness because we haven't built housing fast enough, commensurate with the job growth. And until we do that, we will continue to push more people into homelessness.
Okay, thank you. Alison, briefly, if you could.
Just in terms of what the resources that 2948 would garner would be spent on, in addition, we are 47th or 48th out of all 50 states in our spending on mental health and
That's right.
behavioral health interventions, even though progress has been made in the last couple of sessions.
Yep.
And I want to acknowledge and applaud that. And King County itself has done quite a bit to increase the availability of behavioral health treatment, but we still do not have adequate responses.
Right.
And one of the things that I think is really significant, John said permanent supportive housing. This is a situation in which the Downtown Seattle Business Association and the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness and the Transit Riders Union agree. The resources need to be directed towards the people who need them the most.
Right.
We talk a lot about people who are at 0 to 30% of area median income.
Right.
Lots of times people don't necessarily know what that means. It's about $23,000 a year for one person.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who are at 10%, 12%, 15% of area median income.
Right, right.
So they have a few $100s at most to spend on their housing costs.
Right.
That means that we need to ensure that they can be at home and not in the street.
Thank you for breaking down those details about the bill, and I urge people to look further into this because I know the state's going to be arguing about it quite a bit over the next few weeks. We need to start wrapping up the show that's gone by lightning fast here. Alison, I want to try to wrap up in this way. The future of House Bill 2948 very much in flux right now. Let's say it does pass at the state level. I know the county council still has to enact it, and I know there's at least one member who has said he won't approve it if preemption of cities is included. So I want to think about your final thoughts for the state, the county, and city lawmakers in the weeks ahead.
Sure. I would say for the state, county, and city lawmakers, keep your eyes on the people who are at the heart of this. We have to go big in our investments so that people can go home. And I think that the smart elected officials understand that their timelines are not as important as the timelines of the people who need the homes today and 10 and 20 years into the future. And for people who are watching who care about this issue, who might be teachers or nurses or volunteers at their local food banks, I would say call your lawmakers, 1-800-562-6000. It's free. You give them your name and address. They look up your lawmakers. I think the elected officials in Olympia need to hear from the public that we're looking to them for leadership and action. We'll handle the King County Council and the Seattle City Council in the same way. These are real community needs.
Go big and go home. The new slogan for Alison there. John, I want to talk about this. Let's say the state measure passes, doesn't pass. Your concerns about the possibility of a city measure on the horizon. Final thoughts, state, county, city levels right now.
I hope the legislature takes the opportunity to allow what would be a historic investment countywide at a regional level to deal with a regional crisis. It's something the business community supports.
Okay, thanks very much. Katie, final thoughts. If House Bill 2948 does not pass at the state level, do you think that means we're going to have some sort of business tax measure on the ballot at the city level this fall, or what's up?
I mean, very likely, yes. I think if the state bill doesn't pass, the Tax Amazon campaign is, as far as I know, planning to run a citizens initiative, which would then put a measure on the ballot in November. The city council also could potentially take action themselves, or the city council could put their own measur on the ballot. So there are a lot of possibilities. Yeah.
And final thoughts for our lawmakers as they're moving ahead here.
I mean, just pay attention to the scale of the problem, right? We need 37,000 more units of housing countywide just for those extremely low income households. So let's take a big step forward, and let's also not cut off the path to taking additional steps.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you, for your input here, and we will be right back.
Tax the big businesses for the homeless.
It really depends on the level of those taxes.
Well, I don't think King County knows how to use the taxes they get as it is. I don't see why tax them more.
We have a homeless problem. Something's got to change.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Before we close today, it's time for our weekly Cio Poll. Should the state ban cities from charging an additional payroll tax for affordable housing and homeless services? Yes, no, or are you undecided? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and weigh in with your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next time, it's time for the 2020 U.S. Census. Billions of dollars and your political voice are at stake for the next decade. Count on us to tell you why and show you how you can participate. Next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.